a volunteer-run peer support network. We were established to promote peer support and awareness of best practice in volunteer management amongst the managers of heritage sector volunteer programmes within the London region. That's a mouthful. So we are one of many regional networks across the UK who work with the National Heritage Volunteering Group to help unlock the power of heritage volunteering by creating connections and sharing best practice. If you haven't heard of us before, then I hope after today you will see the benefits of joining us. So a little bit more about us. So I'm Rhiannon Green, nice to welcome you all. I'm the current chair of LHVG, and I've been part of the network for around 10 years and on the committee for about 5. My day job is volunteer manager for the Zoological Society of London, which is a global conservation charity. So handing over to Vanessa.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Theed. I'm the current Vice Chair of the London at the LHVG. I've been a volunteer from my early life, working in volunteer management for 16 years. I'm part of the LHVG network for 6 years and on the committee for 5. I'm also founding and steering committee member of the HVG, and my day job is volunteer and apprenticeship strategy manager for the Natural History Museum, where I'm currently on furlough. Over to Karen.
Hello everybody, I'm Karen Gurney. I'm the secretary of the network. I've been part of the network, I think it's for 5 years, and I've been on the committee for 4. My day job is I am volunteer programme manager for the Imperial War Museums for the London branches, so HMS Belfast, Churchill War Rooms and IDM London. They're all mine.
Perfect. Thank you very much, ladies. Pleasure working with them. Next slide, please. So today, within the current context of the COVID-19 crisis, we'll be sharing some of our hints and tips on where to focus your energies to keep your volunteer teams engaged and motivated. So I'm sure you'll agree when I say that we're all under increasing pressure when it comes to managing our time and fitting in our various commitments. And it often seems as though there aren't enough hours in the day. Therefore, no matter how much affinity a volunteer may have for a particular cause, we need to remember that staying focused and engaged right now is particularly challenging, especially when people might have additional commitments. I think we can all relate to that to some degree. So we hope the hints and tips that we share today will have particular pertinence right now, but will also help you to feel equipped to deal with other times of uncertainty, such as building or regeneration projects or strategic changes of direction. So we've got some questions for you throughout the session, and we'll answer as many of yours as we can. But with such a big audience today, we may not be able to get through them all. But I promise to you is that we will send you the answers after the session. So to kick us off, we've split the session into 4 key themes, and we've got a question for you guys at the beginning of each section. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa to introduce the first section. Thanks, Vanessa. Vanessa, you might need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Rhiannon. The first theme is flexibility, and just before we start, we have a poll that we would like you to respond to. I think Karen's just getting that, Rhiannon's getting that poll ready for us. The question is, what could flexibility in relation to volunteering look like for you? And there are 4 answers: simpler application forms, flexible commitment, skill-based volunteering rather than prescribed roles, all of the above. So if you'd like to vote, and I think I'm seeing an overwhelming majority at the moment. Okay, I think that's a few of you still left to vote. Okay, let's just end that poll. And let's share the results. So as you can see, the key one there was all of the above, and I'm hoping that during our talk today that you'll actually be able to hear some of those answers that might actually help to in what you're doing in your current work at the moment. So moving on, in the fact of reflecting on our own lives during the current crisis, we might have been required to work from home, or not if working from home isn't an option. We might be caring for someone or finding a big void where our social lives were. Things are different. At the same time, The current crisis has prompted thousands of people to step up to volunteer, primarily on an as-needed basis. To do this, people transition from expressing an interest to becoming a fully fledged volunteer in a fraction of the time traditional volunteering usually takes. The sign-up process for NHS responders was instant. And though it is unlikely that we will see such large numbers convert to non-crisis volunteers, what we do need to consider is our approach to volunteer management in a new way. Flexibility is going to be vital going forward to appeal to this new wave of volunteers and to fit in with new lifestyles. As volunteer managers, this is already a key subject of discussion prior to the pandemic, but we can no longer ignore that we need to start thinking and operating differently. Tomorrow is now here. So what is flexibility? We all have a slightly different definition of what flexibility looks like in relation to volunteering, but take our word for it. Most of us will only have scratched the surface of what is possible and what may be desired. Take this example. I've seen many organisations, including some we've worked for, laud themselves as flexible and volunteer friendly based on the ability of a volunteer to choose between full day or half day shifts or only helping for one weekend in 4. Whilst we recognise not all voluntary roles can be 100% flexible, as certain duties can only be done at certain times of the day, nighttime gardening probably isn't yet a thing, and your organisation may need a minimum of coverage at any particular time. The previous example isn't very flexible as it still imposes certain conditions as to when and how a volunteer needs to perform their duties. So by our thinking, and it will take some personal and professional growth on our part to achieve this, and we're not necessarily there yet ourselves, true flexibility will be core to all aspects of the volunteering arrangement. So volunteer management, to providing options and choice. Example, providing multiple ways to apply for a role, to communicate or hear from you as an organisation. In regards to volunteer commitment, the ability to be able to help out by offering your services as a volunteer, as and when it suits you, with no prescribed pattern of commitment. And lastly, volunteer role, the ability to pick and choose or tailor tasks to a volunteer's abilities and preferences. So let's talk about some examples of embedding flexibility. We'll all be at different stages with what is possible going forward, and we know we won't become fully flexible overnight, but we do have some ideas for you and what we think could work towards what you're trying to achieve. Do application forms show the best of someone? We need to reflect on what our recruitment and sign-up processes look and feel like for someone we want to attract into the organisation. With more and more competition for people's time and interests, we need to simplify and make this as easy as possible. We need to move on from a "you're lucky to be here" attitude to "we're lucky to have you." Are we advertising where people will see our opportunities? Think about what's hot right now. TikTok, supermarkets, it's where everyone's been right now. Netflix. Can people register their interest easily at a touch of the button? If I can do it on the go, then I'm far more likely to see it through. And are there ways for people to try it out without signing their life away? Do we need to predetermine the look and feel of a volunteer role? Ever been put off by a 4-page job description? I have, but then imagine how that comes across with a volunteer position. Role descriptions by their nature prescribe what tasks or skills someone needs to do or have to help you with, and are useful for matching a specific person to a specific role. But think about all the people you might miss out on as a result. Could we instead advertise discrete tasks which could be slotted together to form tailored individual roles? Think Build-A-Bear volunteering. This approach. It allows people to choose tasks based on what they're interested in and feel comfortable doing, so it's more inclusive from the outset. It encourages and facilitates skill-based volunteering more effectively and shows people to add on activities to try something new and add variety or stretch them if progression opportunities might allow. And it also allows the organisation to respond to its needs more effectively by introducing new tasks as they arise without the need to consult an existing volunteer team to change a role description. Time-bound tasks will be more important in periods of uncertainty. Does someone really need to tell you that to volunteer? I know as people, we are interested in knowing lots about our volunteers, but ask yourself, do we really need to ask everything that we do of our volunteers? And 4, where were we before, the last one, where were we before Zoom? As the current situation eases and life resumes some semblance of normality, let's not forget all the newfound digital skills and ways of engagement we found. What aspects of our volunteer management could now be done online as a matter of course? online interviews and recruitment sessions, training and development, supervisions and meetings, without considering what tasks could be managed remotely. Digital solutions could allow us to be far more flexible and economic with our time for both our organisations and the volunteers. So what as volunteer managers can we do? How do you bring in flexibility without raising your programme to the ground? Every time you start a new project or a dimension changes, make the time to review and ask yourself questions like, what is the aim of this volunteer task? What does a person really need now to undertake this task? Can they learn this later or pick it up? Could this task be split up to suit a broader audience? Could this be done in a different way? If not, why not? What does the volunteer get out of this? Would my friend, boyfriend, mother be able to do this? As volunteer managers, we need to constantly ask ourselves, are we administrators or enablers? Remember, today's volunteers aren't looking to marry you. They simply want a date and to see where it might lead to. Flexibility is key. I'd like to hand over the time to Karen.
Thank you very much. My theme is communication. So Rhiannon is just about to put up another poll for you. Is it coming? Is it there? There we go. So we would like to hear from you as leaders of volunteers. Let us know which one of the following communication tools do you rely on the most? Email, telephone. We've put in face-to-face or Zoom nowadays because, you know, the reality of COVID-19, social media or good old-fashioned post, sending things through the mail. So far, email is absolutely leading here. And lots of you are responding. And I think that's everybody, so thank you, Rhiannon. And if you would share the results so you can see that by far email is the most popular form of communication. Thank you, Rhiannon. So hopefully I'm going to give you some ideas of different ways to communicate with volunteers and different reasons for communicating with volunteers. And my opener is essentially communication. It's the core to building a sense of community. Honestly, it's a lot of work, but if you get it right, you will see an increase of trust and productivity. In times of uncertainty, it's easy to overlook communication or simply opt not to communicate at all when the message is changing so rapidly. Communication is even more important at these times. It helps reassure people and provide them with a touchstone to your organisation. It can be tempting to rush headlong into communications during these times, which means they might not be as effective as they could be, and they could just be simply ignored. If you spend time planning what communications will be sent, when and by who, to ensure that they are as effective as they can be, and to avoid the need to send additional unplanned messages later so you're not spamming your audience. Your plan should map out any upcoming communications, but also keep track of who has sent what, where, and who has read it. This will help you identify what works and allow you to change tack if you need to. Try to avoid a scattergun approach, as this will only just muddy your message. But, word of warning, don't dawdle. Don't take too long planning. During uncertainty, you don't need perfect communication strategy, but you do need a coordinated and considered approach. And a basic plan will help you to do this. As leaders of volunteers, you are all very familiar with communication, but in a crisis, it's really easy to forget the basic principles of good communication. Think about who your audience is. Who you need to communicate with should determine the tone and the channel that you use. For instance, most volunteers I know absolutely hate using jargon, so just don't use it when you're communicating with volunteers. Have something to say. Ensure you know the purpose of your communications, as people tune out of pointless chatter. And if your volunteers know what is expected of them, it reduces anxiety and increases the likelihood that they will engage more with you and your organisation. Vary the channels that you use. Different channels will suit different people and different messages, so choose wisely. Think about analogue and digital methods, how you disseminate to those of your team who may not respond to one or the other. In the chat section, Rhiannon's going to pop in some of the tools that I use personally. Remember, just pick 2 or 3, and if stretched, keep it simple. For instance, I use Buffer an awful lot to communicate with volunteers through social media. We have an informal Facebook group. I have opt-in weekly newsletters for kind of just community building, but then use direct emails that's sent to all of my volunteers for business critical things like an update from our head of volunteering. But we also do Zoom meetings, the usual coffee afternoons, the check-ins, but then some silly things like I've put in dog bingo in there. Again, it just builds up a sense of belonging and a sense of community, and it's an opportunity for volunteers to ask you anything that is suddenly on their mind. But never underestimate the power of the personal touch, especially if you have volunteers that you know are struggling with their well-being. A phone call goes a million miles. Whatever channels you use to communicate regularly. Uncertainty makes people feel anxious and increases FOMO, fear of missing out. During uncertain periods, situations can often change rapidly, and regular communication will ensure that people are kept up to date with key decisions as they're being made. Be consistent. So consistent to ensure your message to your volunteers is in line with what you are saying to your staff, consistent with what you are saying to your public, and also consistent in terms of when your communications are planned to come out, so no one has any unwanted surprises. Be as transparent as possible. Honesty and integrity will manage expectations. Your volunteers are on your side and they can be trusted. Trust breeds trust. So if you don't know the answer to something they're asking, or you simply aren't in a position to give them the answer right now, say that. It's okay. Volunteers will respect you for it. Be clear and coherent. People aren't mind readers, and if they have to decipher what you're actually saying, the message won't get through. Make it visually appealing, make it pretty. Remember, not everyone enjoys swathes of narrative, so if a message catches your eye, you're more likely to read it. And listen and request feedback. Communication is a two-way street. If you're always on transmit but never on receive, people are going to switch off. Find out what people want, what concerns them, and what they'd like to see more or less of. This could be as simple as a quick 5-minute conversation with your audience every now and then as a check-in. It doesn't always need to involve long surveys. As I said, communication is crucial at any time, but especially during uncertainty, when people may feel less of a connection to your organisation, it can be tricky. But beware, it can consume all of your time if you let it. As volunteer managers, we need to determine what is appropriate and reasonable based on the current situation and your personal capacity. So a few points, a few key things to take away are: plan it out, but don't let that delay you. Communicate up as well as down. So remember, your decision makers need to be kept informed too, otherwise all your efforts are in vain. Be reflective. If volunteers aren't responding to your message, adapt your delivery and don't spam people. And you are not alone. Work closely with your organisation's communications teams. They're on your side, and use your network. Your communications will only be as good as your intel. Someone once told me that volunteer managers could strike up a conversation with a tree. Leaders of volunteers, you have these skills. So play to your strengths, find channels that you enjoy, and use what works for you. And I also have the pleasure of doing the next theme, which is affiliation and community. And once again, unsurprisingly, we have another poll for you. And Rhiannon is going to put one up. So what do you think is the primary reason volunteers get involved with your organisation? Do they believe in your cause? Do they want a career in the sector? Do they want to gain new skills, or meet new people, make friends? Oh, it's a close run thing, this one. Okay, thank you, Rhiannon. That's perfect. And only by a tiny amount, they want to meet new people, has just beaten they believe in our cause, which is really interesting, actually. And I'm rather glad you've all decided that, because it fits in very nicely with our next theme, which is affiliation and community. So community is a bit of a buzzword when it comes to volunteering these days, but is it really important? And is it something we should worry about, certainly during a challenging period? In basic terms, yes, but let's unpick a little bit. So my next slide is a quote from Scholastic, who are publishers who specialise in children's education, which is slightly random in this context, but we felt it summed up affiliation really nicely. It is a shortened version of the original quote, so Rhiannon will put the full quote in the chat, a link to it in a second. So in other words, volunteers need to feel affiliated, albeit to different degrees, to your organisation in order for a community to form. Building a volunteer community or including them within your organisational community may take time, but if planned well, it can build trust, loyalty, facilitate friendships and connections, and provide resilience, all of which are vital to maintaining an engaged and committed team that sticks with you during difficult times. Sorry. Oh, no, that is the right slide. Encouraging and supporting your volunteers to feel affiliated to your cause, it isn't rocket science, and thank goodness we just established in our earlier poll something already prompted volunteers to get involved with you in the first place. Talk to your volunteers, and again, we're going back. Take time to understand their interests and what brought them to your organisation in the first place. Find out what motivates them, and trust. Again, communication in its consistency, transparency, and honesty. Show you trust and value them. Consider the impact of decisions on your volunteers. Explain your reasoning, listen to their responses, and provide opportunities for volunteers to feedback. And the good old-fashioned never forget the power of recognition activities. Empower volunteers. Enable them to present ideas and lead on activities. For example, supporting others via buddy systems, mentoring, helping with recruitment, training. Empower people. Think about the language that you use. Always make it inclusive. Always use we. Always use, for example, Imperial War Museum workforce, IWM people, it's your team. Never make it us and them. The amalgamation of your workforce is so important. Use shared spaces when you can, shared mess rooms. Hold events that include everybody. You can support your volunteers to feel more affiliated to your organisation, from making the recruitment process light touch and enjoyable, to organising joint events for both staff and volunteers to meet each other, to asking for regular feedback and acting on it. It might be challenging to build a community from scratch if it didn't exist before the uncertainty arose. But let's boil it down to 3 top tips for maintaining it during this time. Ask your volunteers how they're doing. Ask them what they want. Then listen to their responses and act on their suggestions. Trust your volunteers with sensitive information and communicate regularly to keep them informed. Enable your volunteers. Enable them to support others, a cascade tree or volunteer-led Zoom sessions. Enable them to find alternative ways to help you, possibly fundraising or role development at this time. Before I finish this section, I will hand over to Vanessa, and I will leave you with this quote from Mario Puzo. "The strength of a family, like the strength of an army, is in its loyalty to each other." Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Karen. The last theme for our session is about empowerment, and so we have another poll for you, the very last one. So what's the biggest barrier that you have faced? Never have enough resources, time, money, staff, etc. Volunteering isn't understood by senior management. Confidence, and don't know what my next steps are. Ooh. It's interesting. We seem to have a bit of a runaway favourite. Never have enough resources, time, money, staff, etc. So I think we've probably got near enough everybody on there. So let's just share those results. So as you can see, never have enough resources, time, money or staff, etc. I think that's one of the things that we probably, as all volunteer managers, would like to have more of. But I think what we need to do is obviously, hopefully what this theme will actually talk to you about is actually making yourself more well known, so that hopefully you can get a little bit more of what you need to help you. So in regards to empowerment, we've briefly touched on the importance of enabling and empowering your volunteers, and if it's taken to its highest volume, could extend as far as co-creation and using our skills of working with volunteers to co-develop the solutions. This is a big and interesting topic, which sadly requires its own webinar. But what we'd like to do is focus on the role of empowering the volunteer manager. Last year's theme for International Volunteer Managers Day was changing the tune. The Association of Volunteer Managers put forward a couple of ways leaders of volunteering can change the tune. The first is to recognise the importance of volunteer management in creating an effective way for supporting and enabling volunteers. And the second is to empower and give confidence to people who involve volunteers to embed flexibility into the infrastructure that allows volunteers to create their own gift. Whilst this may not be what you think would be top of your list to do during a period of uncertainty, there is no better time to demonstrate the critical role volunteers play in your organisation, and therefore this theme should always be up there at whatever time. So let's look at it in context. We can't ignore that elephant in the room. It's going to be easier for some to develop their profile and in turn their volunteers' profile than others, but it's not insurmountable. This has a large amount to do with your organisational context. Consider where, as a volunteer manager, you sit in your organisation. Which department are you in? Where are you physically located? For example, I'm in HR and I'm actually in the main office in South Kensington at Natural History Museum, but there is also offices in Tring. I know some of you have a number of offices and you might be based in one location. So think about that. And where are you, the people that could, where are you in your organisational hierarchy, and what is your role within that? And who do you report into? And do you have a senior member of staff as a champion? So where are you in relation to where those senior managers and your champions might potentially be? All these factors will influence your ability to have impact, but we also shouldn't use this as an excuse. As volunteer managers, we need to be proactive, but we can't wait around to get noticed, and no one else is going to do it for us. So what can volunteer managers do? From our experience, we believe that if you invest time in the following areas, you will see a positive change in your profile, which will empower you to lead from the front. So first of all, find your champions. Volunteer managers are often the only subject specialist within our organisations, often resulting in us as having to do everything ourselves. If this is the case, use this to your advantage to forge and develop connections, and in the course of your day-to-day duties, work out who your champions are. By champion, we simply mean someone else who is as passionate as you are about volunteering, who can back you up. Hopefully that's all of us today here on this call. Champions can sit at any level of the organisation, and for some of you, it could be the person who oversees volunteering for your organisation. But if you are the only person, then it's good to have at least one senior management champion who can help you to drive your vision. 2, be confident in what you can offer. Volunteer managers are the linchpins in organisations in various staff or departments. We hold the key to the engagement and deployment of a raft of enthusiastic, knowledgeable and diverse people who can become your best advocates or worst critics, depending on how they're managed. I've never met a volunteer yet, personally, who hasn't got some skills and advantages that we can use within our organisation. So don't let anybody ever tell you that they haven't got them. Remember that volunteers are central to organisational recovery and resilience, and you are the one who knows how best to harness that strength. 3, be the best volunteering advocate you can be. As the voice piece of and for volunteers, you have a responsibility to ensure they are seen and heard. Look for opportunities to lobby the volunteer cause, both internally and externally, and get your volunteers to help. A personal story about impact works wonders, and your champion to help or introduce you. Share your experiences with colleagues and other volunteer managers informally over coffees and at socials, and formally through arranging to add articles to your intranet or magazines or newsletters, or creating a presentation to update your staff about volunteering. Encourage your teams or departments to add volunteers to their meeting agendas, and get yourself an invite. Attend those meetings where possible to provide an update and to share and discuss volunteering. Seek out opportunities to be involved in the decision-making process about new or existing initiatives that could involve volunteers. Be nosy. By nature, go out there and find out what's going on. Read what's going on your intranet. Read what's going out in your newsletters in general. See what's being out on Twitter feed, and see where you can contact and make those connections within your organisation. 4, demonstrate volunteer impact. Nothing speaks louder than being able to demonstrate and clearly articulate the positive impact volunteering has had for your organisation and on the lives of the volunteers themselves. Take the time to properly plan, design, share and distribute feedback from your volunteers. Volunteers, and I'm sure we all can agree, have an awful lot to say. So let's listen and let's use some of what they have to tell us. Embed KPIs and impact measures to your projects from the outset, so you'll be able to collect the data you will later need, and think beyond how many hours and how much does that equate to normal money. There are other ways that you can actually identify that impact by increased visitor numbers or increased visitor engagement. Whether the data has been requested or not, proactively initiate regular reports to senior managers about the volunteer impact so they become informed about what you do, and you can use this to work out what they're interested in. If you're not already providing statistics about your volunteers into your management reports, ask if you can actually contribute. Once you've got them interested in any aspect of volunteer impact, they're on the first rung of the ladder, and it's much easier to start to influence further. And finally, invest in your CPD, your continuing professional development. Don't wait for your line manager to help. Be proactive. There are lots of opportunities out there. Join relevant networks to share and learn from other volunteer managers. LHVG works for those of you in London, shameless plug there, but that's what we'd like to try and help you with. Have you considered mentoring? Either becoming a mentor yourself or seeking a mentoring relationship by another volunteer manager? LHVG can help you with that as well. Actively immerse yourself in the wealth of discussion and debate around volunteer management out there. You'll be at the heart of latest thinking, and it never hurts to be able to name drop that one of your competitors is leagues ahead. Attend relevant workshops, webinars and conferences on volunteer management. There are quite a few. The LHVG newsletter will actually identify all of those for you as well and send them out to you on a bi-weekly basis. And HVG, the Heritage Volunteering Group, runs a very cost-effective conference every year. That's it for empowerment, and I'd now like to hand over the time to Rhiannon.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Vanessa. So we know that we've given you quite a lot of information there. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. What we've given you here is a bit of a roadmap. So you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed with information. There's lots of questions and additional information coming through on the chat, which is great and adding a wealth of discussion. But what we've done is condense our thinking down into our 6 top tips, which can act as a summary and help you to think about how you could start working towards now, or what you could start working towards now. These are on the screen, so I'm just going to give you a moment to have a little read of that. Okay, so you may not quite have finished reading through that, but what we have designed this to be is a takeaway that we will send you after the webinar. So hopefully that will be useful to summarise our conversations today. But now we're going to move on to answer some of the questions. If we could have the next slide, please. So at the bottom there are our contact details, should you wish to get in contact with us and continue the conversation beyond today. But just looking through the questions, we've had a few so far, and a lot of them have been answered by you all actually throughout the conversations. But there's a question here, and I don't know who out of Karen and Vanessa perhaps wants to take this one, from Mark, who would like to hear about the best examples of friends groups creating new volunteers. And Mark and I had a little exchange, and the pros and cons. What is the best practice out here, and what pitfalls to avoid? Vanessa, do you perhaps want to answer that one about friends volunteers with your HVG hat on?
I probably can't answer it that as well as I might like to, actually, to be honest. There are a lot of groups out there. There's been a lot of volunteers, and I think there was some due on the session today from the VNA who've actually formed a form of tree to actually contact the volunteers within their teams to actually keep them in touch, which has been a really nice way. So identifying some key volunteers who are actually working with certain groups and actually being able to then filter down and actually set up little small Zoom chats with themselves to keep themselves up to date and let them know and let each other know what's happening and make sure that everybody's okay. There are a lot of other various groups. Karen, do you have any that you can think about that you can share?
I think that's probably the best example of volunteers, and again, in the kind of the peer-to-peer support way. Yeah, it's particularly on Facebook, works really well for Imperial War Museum. So volunteers will kind of have a little personal chats. I've seen on the chat that we've got, a few people have been talking about Teams or Slack. We use a closed Facebook group for that kind of chat and support. So I hope that answers the question.
It doesn't quite, because I think actually Mark was asking about friends groups, but I didn't stop you both because I think it was very useful. There are a number of groups actually within HVG that actually think about friends volunteering more specifically. So when we send through some additional information, we'll make sure to include their contact details for you, Mark, so that we can completely round off that question for you. But another question is from Katie, and it's around any advice or guidance for keeping volunteers motivated who do similar roles to paid staff and making sure everyone feels part of the same team. Karen or Vanessa, does one of you want to take that?
I'm happy to take it in regards to something that happened recently before the shutdown. Was that we had at the Natural History Museum, we had a number of volunteers that were actually looking to work within our marketing team, and they would be doing something similar to what the paid staff were doing, but slightly different. But it was because they wanted to gain that experience, and so that's what we were actually recruiting. We actually identified exactly what their motivations were and what the role was about, and had them come in, find out exactly what they were doing, but also so that we could see that it was actually probably skills development for them. And that's obviously kept them motivated to the fact that they've continued to carry on that role remotely and digitally from home. So I think sometimes it's very much when you're working alongside staff, it's actually understanding exactly what their volunteers are achieving and checking in with them regularly to make sure that it is actually still fitting what their expectations were, and also making sure that they do feel like they're achieving from something, but making sure that those tasks are flexible and enjoyable for both, and that they're actually supporting the organisation at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to add a sort of comment from ZSL's perspective. We're looking actually with reopening, having some volunteer roles that are very similar to staff roles, and actually the way that we're trying to ensure that they are separate is thinking about actually supervision levels and what happens should there be a problem or an issue, and obviously that will then get escalated to the staff members of that team. So thinking about the line management relationship and making it clear who is leading whom, and also who is responsible in that area or that role should something go wrong. And that's how we are trying to make a clear division between voluntary and paid roles that perhaps might be within the same sphere. Did you want to add something, Karen?
No, I was just agreeing with you that it's in the line management structure. All our volunteers are line managed by members of staff who are experts in their field. And so whilst some roles might look and appear similar from the outside, actually on the inside in the structure with responsibility levels, it is different.
We're going to take a couple more questions. We're conscious that it's 11:45, but because we were a few minutes late getting everyone through the door, we'll go on for a little bit longer. So if you do need to leave us, that's okay. Please do say goodbye in the chat and we'll make sure that you get all the answers. But we'll do 1 or 2 questions more and then we'll round off. So there's another question here from Kirsty. Is there any more information about the mentoring that was just mentioned? I think that was something that you mentioned, Vanessa.
Yes, I mean, if you're interested in mentoring, and you then the best thing to do is to contact us. Use the londonhvg@gmail.com email. Write to us, just saying the type of things that you'd like to do. And when you're thinking about your mentoring, what particular area do you want that actual help and support in? And then what we can do is we can come back to you, and then we can help tie you into another volunteer manager that would be willing to share or actually help to give you that information that you might need, and have some regular calls with you so you can chat to. There might be 1 or 2 people to start with, but hopefully we can arrange someone that you feel comfortable with and you can learn from as well. So please do email us in and we'll happily join you up with someone.
Absolutely. And a secondary question actually came up from Rachel around mentoring outside of London. Obviously, we are primarily within London, but one of the huge virtues of being part of the wider Heritage Volunteering Group is that we therefore have connections to the other regional networks across the UK. So yes, the same answer to you, Rachel. Please do get in touch with us in the first instance and we can loop you up with someone within your region, potentially.
I would also recommend the Association of Volunteer Managers who have a slightly more formal mentoring process. I believe they're about to put the call out for mentees. The call went out for mentors a month or so ago. I've signed up to be one, and they're just about to put the call out for mentees, and then they're going to kind of match people together. So Association of Volunteer Managers is a really good place to look.
Brilliant. And a last question, which has been sent through anonymously. Do you have any examples of collaboration around volunteer resources across local and connected organisations?
Well, we have one, Rhiannon, don't we? In the fact of the CryoArcs volunteers between the Natural History Museum and ZSL as well. So that's something else, something that you and I have actually been tasked with, but obviously won't be now dealing with until after lockdown as well. So there's things like that as well. We've also, the Natural History Museum has also ran a project last year, which was actually in connection with the Horniman, which actually we tweeted about yesterday to do with wellbeing. And that was a collaborative project with UCL as well, which was a great way of actually helping to deal with supporting volunteers and actually helping them to feel more confident in their ways of communicating as well. So that was a great learning activity, and they produced a really good learning booklet that was actually been used by the museum as well. So I think there's quite a few out there. I'm sure there's more that we can think about.
There's
Karen?
Lots of examples. And Karen, do you want to talk about IWM North and their project, which finished a couple of years ago now, but it's a good example?
Yes. It's a fantastic example. It was Volunteering for Wellbeing, and it was in collaboration with a number of museums in Manchester, and it was entirely aimed at promoting the value of wellbeing towards volunteering. I was also going to mention in the London branches, it's not long-term projects, it's kind of short-term projects that we work with. We have a veteran and eyewitness program called We Were There, which is amazing, and we have sort of short-term 1 to 2 week projects where we have, for instance, Help for Heroes will come in or blind veterans will come in and talk about their experiences. So it's kind of collaboration with a small c.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, guys. What we'll do is we'll answer those questions, as we said, after the session, and when we're not thinking on the hoof, I'm sure we can come up with a few more suggestions and examples for you. And Danielle, who ran the Imperial War Museum North programme has just put the link in the chat as well. So thank you, Danielle, for that. That's a really good example, particularly around volunteering. So if we move on to the next slide, we know that you've all got days to be getting on with. We're now going to wrap up, I'm afraid. So a huge thank you all for attending today's webinar, and also to the M&H show for hosting us. As I say, we've made a note of any unanswered questions. Please do pop any last minute thoughts you have into the chat, because we will grab those and answer them for you shortly. Please remember that the recording is available, or will be available, sorry, on the M&H website shortly. So we hope that you found the session useful. There are so many solutions that we could have talked to you about to support teams through these kinds of challenges, but we hope we've given you some ideas and a sense of what has worked for us. Be confident, you've absolutely got this. I can tell that from looking at all of the chat in the chat forum, but you've also got us. So please do contact us if we can help to connect you or answer any further questions, or put you in touch with anyone else across the UK. Good luck, have a great rest of your day, and obviously a happy Volunteers Week as well. Thanks ever so much, everyone, and speak to you soon.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.